Have your joints ever predicted the rain more accurately than the weatherman? And did your mum always tell you off for sitting by an open window just in case you caught a chill? I bet the answer is yes. These old wives' tales and bits of health wisdom are things we absorb almost from birth. They feel like gospel truth because that's what Grandma said, and that's what her grandma said. But what if I told you that following some of these old traditions isn't just pointless, but might actually be genuinely dangerous for your health? Today, we're going to arm ourselves with logic and science to dive into 5 of the most well-known traditional beliefs. And I promise you'll be genuinely surprised when you find out the truth hidden behind these long-standing myths. Ready to challenge tradition? Before we start our myth-busting, let's look at why these stories are so stubborn. It's not because our ancestors were foolish. Quite the opposite. They were trying to make sense of the world around them at a time when they had no microscopes, no MRI scanners, and certainly no evidence-based medicine. People simply noticed patterns and connected the dots. For instance, someone's joint started aching, and the very next day, it rained. The brain immediately created a link. Joint pain predicts the rain. This is a phenomenon known as confirmation bias. We tend to notice and remember the times that confirm what we already believe, while completely ignoring the instances that prove us wrong. That's how these superstitions were born and passed down through word of mouth, staying firmly stuck in our minds even today. But now we have the knowledge our great-grandmothers lacked, and it's time to separate the wheat from the chaff. So, let's look at myth number 1, which is really an absolute classic, a firm favourite in the parade of old wives' tales. Aches and pains in the knees and joints mean rain is on the way. Millions of people around the world absolutely swear that their own body is the most accurate barometer you can get. They can sense the approaching foul weather long before the clouds even start to gather. This belief is so deeply ingrained, it's part of the furniture, often becoming the source of a good joke or a standard opening line for conversation. It feels like there's some kind of ancient magic at work, a special, almost mystical connection between a person and the great outdoors. Many even take pride in their meteorological sensitivity, viewing it as a peculiar sort of built-in superpower. But let's step away from the romance and nostalgia for just a moment and ask a very simple question. What is actually happening inside our body when we feel the weather drawing in? Can our joints truly look into the future and give us an accurate forecast of the precipitation? Or is this sensation actually hiding something far more mundane? Perhaps something that genuinely requires a little more attention? And here's the interesting bit. There is a kernel of truth in that old saying, but it's actually got nothing to do with predicting the weather. The real key factor, the actual culprit, is barometric pressure. Before we get rain or snow, the atmospheric pressure outside almost always drops. That's just basic physics, isn't it? Our bodies, and particularly our joints, are constantly trying to balance out this external pressure. Inside the joint capsule, we have what's called synovial fluid, which maintains its own internal pressure. Now, when that outside atmospheric pressure falls away, the pressure inside the joint suddenly becomes relatively higher. This then causes the tissues within the capsule to expand, ever so slightly, on a microscopic level. If your joint is perfectly healthy, you wouldn't even notice a thing. But if you've already got some inflammation, say arthritis, rheumatism, or perhaps an old healed injury, even that tiny microscopic expansion is enough to irritate those very sensitive nerve endings. And it's exactly this irritation, this slight stress, that we feel as that deep nagging ache or stiffness. And here we come to the crux of the matter. Your knees aren't actually barometers. They are rather an indicator of an existing problem. They don't foretell the future. They're simply reacting to an accomplished fact. The change in atmospheric pressure happening right now. That ache isn't a weather forecast, dear listener. It's a symptom of something already going on inside the joint. The pressure might drop several hours before the rain, or it might not lead to any precipitation at all. How many times have your joints been playing up, and yet the rain never actually arrived? We tend to forget those instances. That's why talking about prediction is simply incorrect. It's merely a correlation, a coincidence of two events, rather than a true cause and effect relationship. A healthy joint wouldn't react to a change in pressure at all. The pain is a sign that your joint needs help, not that it's time to grab your umbrella. It is a vital diagnostic clue, one that many people sadly ignore by simply blaming the weather. So, what's the real danger of blindly believing this old wives' tale? It's that people end up treating the weather, not the actual illness. Instead of popping down to see the doctor, a rheumatologist, or orthopedic specialist to get a proper diagnosis and start sensible treatment, people just wave it off saying, "Oh, it's just the damp setting in," and they simply put up with it. They might take a paracetamol or two, but they aren't dealing with the root cause. Meanwhile, an inflammatory condition, such as arthritis, is quietly getting worse. The joint cartilage is breaking down, mobility drops off, and the pain becomes persistent and chronic. Believing in the superstition gives a false sense of understanding or control over the situation, all while valuable treatment time slips away. So, if your joints are regularly forecasting the weather, please don't be proud of it. Instead, see it as a serious warning sign from your body and make an appointment to see a specialist straight away. The weather really isn't to blame. Now let's turn our attention to the second great myth, the main foe of mothers and grandmothers everywhere. And of course, it is the draught. Don't sit in that draught, you'll catch your death of cold. Close that window, you'll get chilled. It sometimes feels as though a draught isn't merely moving air, but some insidious, almost mystical force, actively seeking to undermine our health, bringing on colds, earaches, stiff necks, and a whole host of other miseries. This fear of the draught is so potent that many would sooner sit in a stuffy, airless room than risk exposure to that treacherous movement of air. We bundle up our children, we are afraid to open windows on public transport, and we eye the air conditioning unit with great suspicion. This myth is incredibly persistent because nearly everyone has an anecdote along the lines of, "Well, I sat near that open window yesterday and now I've got a runny nose and a sore throat." The link seems obvious, doesn't it? But, scientifically speaking, is that actually true? Now let's settle this debate once and for all, and remember one clear, simple truth. Colds, the flu, and those troublesome acute respiratory infections are caused only by viruses. They are not caused by cold air, a brisk wind, wet feet, and definitely not by a simple draught. To actually fall ill, a specific pathogen must enter your system, that is, a viral particle. These viruses spread primarily through airborne droplets. When a person who is poorly coughs, sneezes, or even just talks, they release microscopic particles of saliva containing the virus into the air. You breathe in that air, the virus lands on your mucous membranes, and that's it. The infection process has begun. Now think about it. Can moving air, a simple draught, create a virus out of thin air all by itself? Of course not. In fact, there are usually far fewer viruses in a fresh current of air from outside than there are in the stagnant air of a room where several people are sitting. A draught is simply the movement of the atmosphere. It is neither a carrier nor a source of disease. Now hold on a moment, you might say. I distinctly remember feeling poorly right after I got a nasty draught. Well, there is a scientific explanation for this too. And thankfully, it doesn't contradict the viral theory. The key is that locally, chilling down a certain part of the body can indeed weaken our immune response, but only temporarily, and only in that specific area. For instance, when a blast of cold air hits your neck or your back, the blood vessels in that specific region constrict or go into spasm. Circulation is impaired, and the local defense system of the mucous membranes in your airways is temporarily lowered. And here is the crucial point. If the virus was already lying dormant in your system, or perhaps you had just picked it up, this temporary dip in immunity gives it the green light. The virus suddenly gets the chance to multiply actively, and that's when you notice the symptoms appearing. So the draught wasn't the cause of the illness. Rather, it acted as a catalyst, the trigger for a bug that was already resident inside you. Right, so let's get to the real danger of this myth. This fear of a little draught often leads people to seal up all the windows and doors completely, especially during the cold months. They effectively turn their homes into a stuffy, sealed container. And what happens inside one of these unventilated rooms, particularly when someone is poorly? Well, the concentration of viruses in the air climbs higher and higher every minute. The humidity drops, and the dryness makes our own membranes, our noses and throats, more vulnerable to infection. The simple fact is, the risk of catching something in that kind of closed space goes up dramatically. It's completely paradoxical, isn't it? By worrying about a draught, we're actually creating the perfect conditions for viruses to spread. In reality, regular fresh air is one of the most effective ways we have to prevent colds and flu. It simply reduces the amount of pathogens lingering in the air. So please don't fear the draught. Fear those stale, stuffy rooms that desperately need a blast of fresh air. Our third myth takes us right back to our childhood. Do you remember that sacred, solemn instruction the school nurse would deliver with such serious gravitas? It was always connected to the Mantoux test, and the phrase was, "Do not get this injection site wet for 3 whole days." It was a huge production. We'd walk around protecting that tiny little bump, the button, as we often called it, as if it were made of glass. We'd shower, twisting ourselves into impossible contortions, just to keep it perfectly dry. And if even a single drop of water happened to land on the spot, that was an absolute disaster, a tragedy of epic proportions, inevitably threatening a terrifying trip to the tuberculosis specialist. This rule was so strict, so ironclad, that virtually no one ever stopped to ask, why exactly were we forbidden from wetting it? What terrible thing could plain old water possibly do to a simple prick under the skin? Let's finally figure out the origins of this strange and persistent medical myth, a myth that, amazingly, is still scaring many parents even today. To begin, we need to properly establish what the Mantoux test actually is. Contrary to a very common misunderstanding, this is absolutely not a vaccination. A vaccination involves introducing a weakened pathogen into the body to stimulate the immune system and encourage the development of immunity. The Mantoux test, however, is a diagnostic test, essentially acting as a type of allergy screen. A specific substance called tuberculin is carefully administered beneath the skin. It is crucial to understand that tuberculin contains neither live nor killed tuberculosis bacteria. It is simply a purified protein derivative, an extract containing proteins that are derived from the bacteria. The purpose of the test is to observe precisely how your body's immune system, specifically the T lymphocytes, reacts to these proteins. If your system has previously encountered the tuberculosis bacillus, you will typically develop a noticeable reaction at the injection site. This usually presents as significant redness and hardening, which is medically referred to as a papule. Therefore, it is a skin test designed solely to gauge the existing sensitivity or tension of your immunity to tuberculosis. The key descriptive word here is intradermal. The substance is introduced into the layers of the skin itself, not simply applied to its surface. Now let's use a bit of straightforward logic here. If the tuberculin is injected into the deeper layers of the skin, how could water that only touches the surface possibly affect the result? The short answer is, it can't. Water is simply not capable of soaking through your outer skin layer, the epidermis, to wash away the reaction, which is happening much deeper down. It certainly won't strengthen or weaken the way your immune cells respond. Think of it this way. If you get a small cut on your finger, you still wash your hands, right? That cleaning doesn't stop the healing process that is taking place underneath the surface. It's exactly the same principle with the Mantoux test. The papule, or that little bump, sometimes called the button, isn't going to swell up like a piece of bread soaking in water. Its size depends solely on the number of immune cells that have been called to the injection site. Therefore, taking a shower after your Mantoux test is perfectly fine and even encouraged. Good hygiene certainly won't hurt anything. Water is completely safe and will not compromise your test results. So, where did this absolute ban on water actually come from? The story goes right back to the days of the Perquet test, which was the predecessor of the modern Mantoux test. When they performed the Perquet test, they applied tuberculin directly onto the skin and then lightly scratched the area using a special instrument called a scarifier. This meant that the skin barrier was compromised, and in that specific instance, getting the area wet truly could wash away some of the preparation and skew the result. The Perquet test hasn't been used for ages now. It was superseded by the Mantoux test, which is far more accurate and simpler to administer, being injected directly under the top layer of skin. However, that instruction to keep it dry simply stuck around. It travelled by word of mouth, purely out of habit, and transferred over to the new Mantoux test. Doctors and nurses of the old guard continued to issue this advice, and parents naturally followed it to the letter. In reality, the Mantoux test does have genuine rules you must follow. You must not rub the injection site aggressively with a flannel or washcloth, scratch it, cover it with a plaster or bandage, or apply strong antiseptics or ointments. It's the mechanical irritation that can potentially trigger a false positive result. Plain water, however, is absolutely fine. Right then, let's move along to myth number 4, accompanied by that very distinctive cracking sound. Now be honest, how many of you love to pop your knuckles, or maybe your neck or back, just to get rid of that tension? And who hasn't immediately heard that strict warning, stop that right now, you'll give yourself terrible arthritis? This particular myth is one of the most popular old wives' tales, or scare stories when it comes to joint health. It paints a truly dismal picture, doesn't it? One minute, you're innocently popping your knuckles, the next, your fingers are horribly gnarled with dreadful arthritis. You can't even hold a teacup, and you're bitterly regretting that bad habit. It certainly sounds convincing and, frankly, quite terrifying. It's this very idea that makes many people try to restrain themselves, even when that urge to pop or click is absolutely irresistible. But let's take a moment now to look at what is actually happening inside the joint when we hear that satisfying snap, and whether this classic scare story has any scientific evidence to back it up at all. Right, so what exactly is that sound? Contrary to what many people think, it is definitely not your bones grinding together. If that were true, we'd be hearing that awful noise with every single step we take. The sound actually originates deep inside the joint capsule itself. Our joints are filled with a special lubricant called synovial fluid. Like any fluid, this liquid has dissolved gases within it, primarily nitrogen. When we stretch or hyperextend the joint, say by pulling a finger back, we suddenly increase the volume within that capsule. This action causes the internal pressure to drop dramatically. According to the laws of physics, when that pressure falls, those dissolved gases instantly stop forming small bubbles. This process is scientifically known as cavitation. It is the rapid creation and subsequent collapse, or implosion, of these tiny gas bubbles that produces that distinctive cracking sound we hear. And that, crucially, is why you cannot crack the same joint twice in a row. You have to wait roughly 20 minutes for the gas to completely redissolve back into the fluid. It sounds pretty harmless, doesn't it? After all, gas bubbles aren't exactly bones grinding together. But what does the scientific community actually say about the link between cracking your knuckles and arthritis? Well, after decades of research, they've found absolutely zero proof of any connection whatsoever. The most famous study concerning this was actually conducted by a doctor named Donald Unger. He was so curious about the question that he decided to perform an experiment on himself. For 60 years, yes, 60 years, he systematically cracked the knuckles on his left hand, leaving his right hand completely alone. Once that colossal period was up, he examined both hands and found absolutely no signs of arthritis in either of them, nor was there any noticeable difference between the two. He even won an Ig Nobel Prize for this dedication. And rest assured, larger and more serious scientific studies involving thousands of participants have also confirmed this finding. The habit of cracking your fingers simply does not increase your risk of developing arthritis. Does this mean that cracking your knuckles is perfectly safe and you can just carry on doing it without a care in the world? Well, not entirely. While you certainly don't need to worry about developing arthritis, there are still some potential drawbacks, albeit rare ones. Some studies suggest that dedicated knuckle crackers might experience a slight reduction in their grip strength over time, along with perhaps a little swelling around the joints. There have also been isolated incidents recorded where overly aggressive, almost fanatical wrenching of the fingers has resulted in sprained ligaments or damage to the joint capsule itself. But these cases are certainly the exception rather than the rule. Perhaps the single most important and frankly undeniable harm caused by this habit is the sheer discomfort you inflict upon everyone around you. For many people, that sound is extremely unpleasant and it sets their teeth on edge. So the main reason to give up this habit might not be medical at all, but purely social. And finally, we come to the fifth myth, the most dramatic, the most cinematic of them all, the classic tale, he turned white with grief overnight. We've all seen it played out on the silver screen or read it in novels. The protagonist suffers some terrible shock, intense stress, or a personal tragedy, and wakes the next morning with a head of entirely white hair. This striking image has firmly established itself in our collective culture as the ultimate symbol of unbearable trauma. Stories about Marie Antoinette, who allegedly went grey the night before her execution, only reinforce this powerful belief. It seems inherently logical to us that such a devastating blow to the nervous system must surely have immediate and visible consequences. But is this phenomenon even possible from a biological standpoint? Can a strand of hair, already possessing its colour, suddenly lose that pigment in the space of just a few hours? Or is it, in reality, merely a beautifully tragic metaphor that bears no relation to the facts? To truly understand how our hair turns grey, we need to look right down into the hair's root, inside the follicle. The colour in our hair comes from a pigment called melanin. This pigment is produced by special cells, known as melanocytes. These cells sit at the base of every hair follicle and essentially inject the pigment directly into the growing hair shaft. As we get older, and also due to our specific genetic makeup, the supply of stem cells that create these melanocytes starts to run out. New melanocytes stop being produced, the existing ones gradually die off, and the production of melanin simply shuts down. The result is that the hair growing out of the follicle is now completely devoid of pigment. It appears grey or white to us because of how light refracts off its keratin structure. So crucially, going grey isn't about the colour leaving an existing hair. It's about the follicle starting to grow brand new hair that never had colour in the first place. It's a gradual process, and it's something that's simply hardwired into our genes. But what exactly is the connection to stress? For many years, scientists dismissed the link between stress and greying hair as purely anecdotal. However, recent research, initially conducted on mice and later confirmed through human observations, has finally shed light on the exact mechanism at play. What they discovered is that severe or chronic stress can indeed dramatically accelerate the process of turning grey. When the body experiences stress, the sympathetic nervous system, which manages our well-known fight or flight response, releases a significant amount of the neurotransmitter noradrenaline. This noradrenaline then travels and directly affects the hair follicles. Critically, it forces the melanocyte stem cells, which are responsible for generating colour, to prematurely and rapidly convert into mature, pigment-producing cells. The consequence is that the entire, limited reservoir of these crucial stem cells is exhausted far too quickly. So, when the time comes for a new hair to emerge from that follicle, there are simply no new melanocytes left to colour it. The new strand of hair, therefore, grows out completely grey. Right then, let's look at the conclusion. Stress certainly can contribute to grey hair, but, and this is the crucial point, it cannot happen overnight. A hair that has already grown and is sitting on your head has its colour fixed. Nothing can suddenly make the pigment disappear from it. Stress actually impacts the hair follicle itself, affecting the new hair that is only just beginning to grow. For that new, grey hair to become visible, you're looking at weeks, possibly even months of growth. So, the dramatic stories we hear about going grey instantaneously, they are largely myths, a bit of artistic or dramatic license, shall we say. Now, there is one very rare condition called alopecia areata. In this instance, all the pigmented, coloured hairs might suddenly drop out, leaving only the grey ones behind, and that does create the illusion of instant greying. But we must stress that this is exceptionally uncommon. So, while stress is certainly detrimental to the colour of your hair, its effects take hold far more slowly than Hollywood would have us believe. So let's summarise the findings of our investigation. Today we discovered that aching knees aren't actually predicting the rain, but are instead reacting to a drop in atmospheric pressure, which affects already compromised joints. We learned that a simple draught won't give you a cold, but sitting in a stuffy room because you're afraid of the draught is a surefire recipe for disaster. We've finally settled the great water debate, proving that it is perfectly fine and even necessary to get your Mantoux test wet. We established that cracking your knuckles doesn't cause arthritis, that popping sound is simply the harmless result of gas bubbles bursting, and finally, we uncovered the truth behind instant grey hair, proving that in reality it's anything but instant. The main takeaway from all of this is simple. Many old wives' tales, no matter how much common sense they appear to hold, simply cannot stand up to scientific scrutiny. Looking after your health should always be based on facts and advice from medical professionals, not on myths. Thank you for watching this video right to the very end. If you learned something new today and managed to shatter even one myth for yourself, please do hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next debunking episode. Now, a question for you. Which old health tales did you believe? Or perhaps there's a myth you'd really like us to tackle in a future video. Let us know in the comments below. We would be fascinated to read your answers.